In an age that's kind of dominated by sequels and superheroes, there's this one filmmaker who has just consistently been pushing the limits of what a Hollywood blockbuster can be. He makes these original, totally mind-bending epics that you just have to see on the biggest screen possible. So today, we're explaining the architect of it all, Sir Christopher Nolan.
People have called Nolan a lot of things, but honestly, this quote from Variety just hits the nail on the head. He's the premier big canvas storyteller of his generation. And we're not just talking about making movies here. This is about crafting entire worlds and blending these really deep intellectual ideas with the kind of pure spectacle that gets everyone into the theater. And when we say everyone, we mean it. I mean, look at this number. His films have brought in over $6 billion worldwide. That's billion with a B. So he isn't just a filmmaker, he's a global cinematic force. He's easily one of the highest-grossing directors in the history of movies.
Okay, and this quote really gets to the heart of what makes Nolan so special. It's this paradox, right? He's an auteur, and we'll get into that term a little more later, but basically, it means a director with this incredibly singular personal vision. But he does it all within the big-budget studio system, making these movies that are both super smart and huge commercial hits. That combination, it's almost unheard of.
So, the big question is, how does someone become the Christopher Nolan? Well, it definitely didn't happen overnight. Let's rewind all the way to the beginning, from his childhood experiments with a Super 8 camera to the scrappy, brilliant debut film that really started it all.
Nolan's obsession with film started really early. I mean, at just 7 years old, he was already inspired by these massive movies like Star Wars. He got his hands on his dad's camera and just started making his own stop-motion shorts with his action figures. He'd build sets out of whatever he could find: clay, flour, egg boxes, you name it. By the time he was 11, he knew this was it. This was what he was going to do with his life.
What's really interesting is that he didn't go to a traditional film school. No, he decided to study English literature because he thought it would give him a different angle on storytelling. But here's the clever part. He specifically chose University College London because he knew it had film facilities he could use. So he was basically creating his own practical film education completely on his own terms.
And this just shows you how resourceful he was from the start. He and his future wife and producing partner, Emma Thomas, they ran the university's film society. But they weren't just watching movies. They actually turned the screenings into a business and then used the money they made to fund their own 16mm films. I mean, they were literally building their own film school from the ground up.
So all of that hard work and hustle eventually led to his very first feature film, Following. And this thing was the absolute definition of independent filmmaking. We're talking a tiny budget, just £3,000, shot with his friends on weekends over an entire year. And to save money on film stock, which was super expensive, he made them rehearse every single scene relentlessly so they could nail the perfect shot in just 1 or 2 takes.
All right, so from those super humble beginnings, Nolan was about to make a jump that wouldn't just define his career, but would put him smack dab on Hollywood's radar. And that leap was his second film, the incredible, mind-bending thriller, Memento.
I mean, seriously, look at the jump from Following to Memento. It's just staggering. He went from a budget of a few £1,000s to $4.5 million. He went from casting his friends to working with professional Hollywood actors and a crew of over 100 people. This wasn't just a step up, it was like a quantum leap into a completely different universe.
And you don't have to take my word for it. Nolan himself says this. He's directed some of the biggest movies ever made, obviously. But he still says that the jump from his first film to his second was by far the single biggest leap of his entire career. The idea for Memento actually came from his brother, Jonathan. And it's such a brilliant concept. A guy who literally can't make new memories has to solve his wife's murder. So the story is told backwards, which forces you, the audience, to experience the world just like he does, completely disoriented and confused. It's genius. And yeah, that huge gamble paid off, big time. The film made $40 million and instantly established Nolan as a major talent. Critics went nuts for it, with one calling the script perhaps the most innovative I had ever seen. It even got him his first Oscar nomination. The indie filmmaker had officially arrived. So, with the success of Memento under his belt, Nolan entered this whole new phase of his career. This is the part where he wouldn't just make blockbusters, he was going to completely redefine them.
I mean, just look at this run. From 2005 to 2012, the man was simply unstoppable. He brought Batman back to life with this gritty, psychological realism in Batman Begins. Then he delivered what so many people called the greatest comic book movie ever made, The Dark Knight. He followed that up with a totally original, mind-blowing sci-fi epic, Inception. And then he just casually capped it all off by finishing his trilogy with the billion-dollar hit, The Dark Knight Rises. Just a decade of pure dominance.
And you have to understand, The Dark Knight wasn't just a movie, it was a total cultural event. It was the first big movie to really use those high-resolution IMAX cameras to give you this incredibly immersive experience. And when it was famously snubbed for a Best Picture nomination, it caused such an uproar that the Academy actually changed its rules and expanded the category. That change is literally still known as the Dark Knight rule.
And then right after that came Inception, a super complex, completely original idea that somehow became a massive global blockbuster. And this quote says it all, really. Nolan proved that you could make smart, challenging, artistic films that could also appeal to a gigantic mainstream audience. He showed that blockbusters and art could be the same thing.
So, what is it that makes a Nolan film feel so much like a Nolan film? You know it when you see it, right? Let's break down his unique filmmaking philosophy and some of his signature techniques, what we're calling the Nolan method.
Okay, so remember that word auteur we mentioned earlier? Well, this is what it means. It's the idea that the director is the true author of the film. And Nolan is a perfect example. He writes, he directs, he produces. He maintains complete creative control to make sure his singular vision makes it to the screen exactly as he imagines it.
And that vision has some very clear signatures. He famously prefers practical effects over CGI, like why fake a semi-truck flipping over when you can just actually flip a real semi-truck in the middle of a city street. He's a huge champion for shooting on physical film, especially that giant IMAX format, for a totally immersive feeling. And of course, his stories are always playing with time and structure, all while digging into these huge themes like memory, identity, and morality.
Now, this unique method hasn't just made him successful, it has cemented a really powerful and lasting legacy. So let's take a look at how that legacy has been recognized, from his most recent triumph all the way to what might be coming next.
The cultural impact of his work is just undeniable at this point. 3 of his films have been chosen by the U.S. Library of Congress to be preserved in the National Film Registry. I mean, that is a huge deal. It's a rare honor that puts his work right alongside some of the most important films ever made in American history.
And that legacy, well, it reached an absolute peak with Oppenheimer. That film was more than a movie, it was a cultural phenomenon, a critical and commercial juggernaut that finally won the Academy Awards for Best Picture and Best Director. This really sealed the deal, cementing his status as maybe the only filmmaker alive who can deliver massive profits and the highest artistic awards on such a consistent basis.
So where do you even go from there? What could possibly be next for the architect of the modern blockbuster? Well, how about taking on one of the oldest stories in Western literature, Homer's The Odyssey, with a reported budget of $250 million and shot entirely on IMAX, of course. Given his entire career of just completely defying our expectations, the only real question left is, what kind of mind-bending, spectacular, and deeply personal journey is Christopher Nolan gonna take us on this time?